Hello everyone, welcome to Learn DAX channel. My name is Siddesh and this is the fourth part of the end-to-end DAX project video series in which we are taking a bunch of business problems and then converting them into DAX queries. So if you haven't watched the first three parts, I really encourage you to watch them before you watch this video as it will set up the foundation for what data set that we're dealing with and what challenges we have covered so far. I'll leave the link in the description and I've also left the link of the data set in the description so you can practice along, as well as I have also added the DAX queries that we are using while I'm demonstrating this video. So later on after watching this video, you can simply use those queries for reference and practice along. So without further ado, let's get started with the business problems that we have for today's video. So for today's video, we have these three business problems. The first one is we have to calculate the total revenue. So in order to calculate the total revenue, what we essentially need is we need to have the sales amount. So when I aggregate the sales amount for the whole sales data set, that gives me the that gives me the total revenue. So if I go to the sales table and if I check the sales amount column, so if I aggregate this complete row, this complete column, then the sum of all the rows in this column is going to give me the total revenue. So one would suggest that this is a very simple business problem. Why are we even considering this in this video series? Well, I'll slowly unfold the reason why we are considering something as simple as just calculating the total revenue. So I'll quickly create a new measure and I will call it total revenue is equal to sum of sales amount. Pretty simple, isn't it? Now, just like we have been doing one practice throughout this video series, which is we take the data from the table and kind of verify if the output that we're getting is correct or not. So let me just change the formatting of this. For that, I'll just add a visual border and I'll also change the display units to none so that I get the actual number as opposed to just some 30K or something. Let me just also add a visual border to it. Yeah, now it's good. So if I bring the sales table and I bring the sales amount column onto this canvas, let's see what do I get. I have the sale ID and I'll change the setting to don't summarize and the sales amount. So at the bottom when I scroll, the total row suggests that the total sales amount is 29,765. So we have verified that. So that's something that we've already verified. So now moving on to the next part, why would I consider something as simple as just using the sum function over a single column to be discussed in this video? Well, there are certain things that I want to discuss. What if I want to calculate the revenue or the sales amount for only the sales that have exceeded a certain amount? Let's take a look at the sales table quickly. And we have sales amount in some cases it's 900, in some cases it's 1400, in some cases it's 480, 400, 500. Let's say the business wants to get the data aggregated for the sales that have exceeded a certain amount, certain threshold amount, maybe like a thousand rupees. So like I have the sales amount. Uh, if I'm sorting it in descending order, I have 1080, 1140, 1200, and likewise. So if business is interested only in getting the aggregated total revenue for the sales that have exceeded a certain amount, then how am I going to do that? Well, let's just see how we are going to approach that. So I can go to my total sales revenue measure and I can write greater than 1000. But it's saying that sum function only accepts a column reference as an argument, which means I cannot add any condition here. So this is why I'm going to use a sumx function, and this is why we are discussing this problem. So if the business is asking that give me the sales amount above a certain threshold value and I want to aggregate accordingly, in that case, I would use something called as the sumx function. So I will call it total revenue sumx is equal to sumx and sales say that because we are taking the sales table and the sales amount greater than 1000, and they should give me the output. So let's see what we've got. See details. Calculation error in message. The function sumx cannot work with value of type boolean. So we weren't quite there. So what went wrong? Well, the thing that went wrong here is when I'm giving a condition to the sumx, this is an expression. This is not a filter expression. So like the error message said that it cannot accept a value of type boolean. If I open the error again, it says the function sumx cannot work with values of type boolean. So it's suggesting that the second argument of the sumx function can only accept something like sales amount or sales amount into sales quantity or sales quantity to sales discount, something of that sort. But it cannot consider something like sales amount greater than 1000. And if I simply give this as my input arguments, then what do I get? Well, I get the same output. I should, if I change the setting of display units to none, I essentially get the same output. But then this begs the question that if you wanted to calculate the revenue for the sales that have exceeded a certain amount, and if I'm suggesting that I should use the sumx function, and the sumx function, if the condition is not satisfying, then what are we like? What's the purpose of using this measure? Well, the way we can approach this has a different solution. So instead of using the condition in the second argument, if I use the condition in the first argument, I can actually get that output. And we're going to see how. So instead of considering the whole sumx table, if I only consider those rows in the sales table which have a sales amount greater than 1000, which essentially means if I'm filtering those particular rows in which the sales amount exceeds 1000 rupees and only that table is fed to the sumx function which then calculates the revenue, then my problem will still be solved. So how do I do that? So I'll use the filter function. I'll filter the sales table such that the filter expression says that the sales amount has to exceed 1000, and if I use this and calculate the total revenue, this is the total revenue that I should get. Now, like we have done throughout our video series, we are going to validate if this is correct or not. So let me quickly go back to the sales table and let me pull out my sale ID and my sale amount. So I'll change this to don't summarize, and also I will apply a filter on top of this such that sales amount is greater than 1000. And if I apply this filter and if I check the sales amount, so this is what we've got, 20095, which is exactly what our measure has calculated. But now, what if I want to have another condition? Like business asks me, not only do I want to see the sales that have crossed a certain threshold, but also that belong to a certain region. Maybe business wants me to find out the sales that have exceeded 1000 and the ones that are coming from, let's say, the country USA. So how do I do that? Now, if I try to use the same logic in this total revenue sumx, it is going to fail because you cannot have two filter functions within the same sumx first argument. So first argument can only contain one filter function. So how do you approach this? So in this case, we go one step ahead and use the calculate function, and we'll just see how. So I'll create another measure. I will call it total revenue calculate. And in this, the first argument is going to be my expression, which is the sum of sales amount. Now, notice here, it says filter. We are going to filter something. So the first thing that I'm going to filter is I want the sales amount to be greater than 1000. So let's try with the sales amount greater than 1000. And now when I add a comma, it becomes an and filter, which means the two conditions are being used in conjunction with each other. So the first is the sales amount has to be greater than 1000, and the country from where the sales are happening has to be USA. So I'll write country is equal to USA, and let me hit enter. Let's see what happens. So this gives me total revenue calculate, which amounts to be 11K. Let me change the formatting, or I'll just use the format painter. Yeah, this was quicker. Now, like we have been verifying, we'll just verify it once again. I'll change this to a table, add my sale ID, and add my sales amount, and I'll add the filter to USA. So right away, it has filtered some values. So these are the sales that have happened for country USA. And if the sale amount is exceeding 1000, then let's just see if our logic is correct. And yeah, we are correct. It is showing as 10615. So what we are doing here is we initially calculated the total revenue simply based on one condition, that give me the sum of sales amount, and no other conditions are applied. Then we went a step ahead, that I wanted the revenue only to be calculated for the sales that happened which crossed a certain threshold, which is 1000 rupees. And the third step was to calculate sales such that not only did they exceed a certain threshold, but they also came from a certain region. Now, one might argue that I could have simply used a slicer on my canvas and then selected country as in USA, and that could have affected this particular KPI card. Yeah, that is also possible. But the aim of this is to get to know the intricacies of DAX and how can we start with a simple measure and add layers of complexity over it and add layers of filters over it. And when we have to add more filters, then how do we change? Like, how do we go from sum to sum x to calculate? So that's what we wanted to learn. So, which is why we covered that question. So now let's move on to the next question. Enough of the total revenue problem. The second problem that we are looking here is to calculate the average selling price per unit. So let's take a look at what this is. Let me go to the sales table, and I have a unit price column, which is essentially the selling price of every product. Now, if I want to calculate the average selling price, I can again use the average function or the average x function, or like we did, we can use the calculate function. Now, depending on the conditions that the business would ask, like for example, give me the average price of products whose unit price exceeds 500, or give me the average price of products whose unit price exceeds 500, as well as where the product category happens to be electronics. So in that case, we are going to gradually move from average to average x to calculate. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm only going to use one simple condition, which is to calculate the through and through average. So let's go ahead with that. So I'll quickly create a new measure. I will call it average price per product is equal to average. Let's go with average x. So I'll use sales table, and it will be the sales unit price. So if I bring this here and I change the formatting, before that I have to turn it into a card, change the formatting. Now again, like we have been doing, pull the sale ID column here, change it to a table, change the setting to don't summarize, then pull out the unit price. Now change the aggregation type to an average and check the bottom of the screen. What happens here is in the total row, I get the average, which is 670. And there's the other way also to calculate the average, which is if I have the total revenue and if I have the number of sales, or if I have the total sum of the unit price, and if I divide that by the number of sales that have happened, I can still get the average unit price. Oh, let's just do that. Let's just change this summarization to sum and try and calculate the average. So I divide 20100 by 30, I guess, which gives us 670. So we have verified that. Now let's move on to the last and final question in this video, which is to calculate the customer lifetime value. So the customer lifetime value is nothing but if a customer, so if there are 30 rows in our sales table, and if one particular customer has made 5 purchases, and let's suppose in those 5 purchases, overall he has spent around 500 rupees. So for that customer, the lifetime value is going to be 500 rupees. So that's what we are going to calculate. So how are we going to do that? Let's quickly take a look at the sales table. And so we have customer ID 1, 2, 3, and likewise, I think we only have 2 or 3 customers. Let's just check the filter. Yeah, so we only have 3 customers. So the 30 sales that have happened across these 3 customers. And we want to see on as a whole, aggregated, what sales have been provided or what revenue has been generated by the sales by the customer ID 1, what revenue has been generated by the customer ID 2, and what revenue has been generated by customer ID 3. So far, whenever we wanted to group by a certain entity, we have been using the summarize function. Like for example, the sales amount by a particular product name, or the sales amount by a particular product category, or the sales by a particular country. We have been using the summarize function because that gives us the flexibility of grouping something. So that's exactly what we are going to do here, which is to use the summarize function. So I'll quickly create a new table. I will call it customer lifetime value is equal to summarize, and we are going to summarize the sales table, and we are going to group by the customer ID because we want the sales amount that has been contributed by each customer in the sales table. So it will be sales customer ID, and we will call this new column the lifetime value, which will be nothing but the sum of sales amount. And if I hit enter, I get a new table which has a customer ID and the sales amount that they have contributed to or their lifetime value. So now let's verify if our tax logic is correct or not. So for that, from the sales table, get the customer ID and get your sales amount. So I pull it here, and these two tables look exactly identical to each other. So our tax logic is correct, and the customer lifetime value that we have calculated is correct. So this is what I wanted to discuss from this video, and I hope you got some value from this video. I hope your understanding of sum x, average x, and calculate, and how we are going to move from one function to the other in a simple case, and how we can complicate that case and introduce more variables and introduce more complexity has improved. And if it did, please share it with your friends, and I would like to know your feedback in the comments. Until then, happy learning and thanks for watching.